I sat at the kitchen table for the last time, remembering some comical moments. Some of my favorite memories at that table were from my mom. She was funny. She didn't try to be. It was because of her accidental, silly antics. For example, I ran my fingers over the tabletop. I felt the dimples and divots caused by my mom thinking she was spraying furniture polish, but spraying oven cleaner instead. Oops. I remembered that thick, solid maple table was almost as old as me and withstood the patina of time. It was shipped over 2,000 miles from Maine to New Mexico when our family was transferred by the Air Force after my father had returned home safely from the Vietnam War. 4 matching chairs surrounded the table, and 2 extension leaves were nestled close by in case company joined us for dinner at the last moment. There was always room as we'd squeeze together and pass the mashed potatoes. In my mind's eye, I heard my dad's contagious laughter. I felt the thump from my grandmother reminding me to keep my elbows off the table. I grinned when I remembered my brother's endless entertaining stories. I saw the faces of the many people who graced that round honey-colored table over the past decades. These memories and so many more were etched into that table's history. The boxes had been shipped, and my family had taken their mementos after my mother's funeral. It was almost time to turn the keys over to the auctioneer so he could liquidate the contents that had made up our longtime family home. I was alone at that table, and the silence was palpable. My heart was full of deep love and gratitude for all that I'd experienced at that table and for the heartache of the loss. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. And when I opened them, it was as though a thin veil was lifted, revealing a couple of profound questions in my mind. If tables could talk, would they tell the stories of our lives? And if they could a table set with positive intention make a significant impact on the issues that face our communities locally, nationally, and even globally? No matter where we live in the world today, the issues are significant. For example, there are 110 conflicts and wars currently going on in the world right now, and many of them have lasted over 50 years. 83% of the world's population lives in conditions with high criminal activity of organized crime. And over 1 billion people on this planet are living in conditions of acute poverty. There have been more mass shootings in the United States than there have been days of the year. These statistics are staggering. They're heart-wrenching. So I set out to answer the questions, and I became obsessed with researching how tables impact lives and if they can make a difference. So it might be helpful to understand at this point that my background is as a hospitality veteran, chef, and sommelier. And I love food, but I believe the true genius is in the gathering, because it's only for a moment in time, and those moments are unassuming yet transformative. I began researching over a decade ago, and I now have an extensive collection of stories that keeps growing. I see the impact that gathering around tables has on culture, courage, and connection. I found the patterns that led me to use the acronym TABLE. T stands for teaching moments that inspire action. A is for advocacy and community building. B is for breaking boundaries. L is for love, courage, and compassion. And E is for educating ourselves and others. So let's go into them individually. And I'll do that by sharing one story from my research as an example of each letter and how one ordinary person can have extraordinary impact, one table at a time. T, teaching moments that inspire action. Dennis felt isolated after immigrating from Haiti to America as a young boy. He stood out, not by choice, but because of a significant language barrier and a brand new school. A wise teacher saw his struggle and encouraged him to embrace his adversity, making it a teaching moment that inspired action. Dennis devised an inclusive plan so that no one in his school would ever eat alone. He did not want his classmates to feel as lonely and as excluded as he had. His intentional program became a conduit for empathy. Ultimately, it rippled outwards, joining 2 other programs, all designed to empower students to create communities of belonging and to eliminate social isolation in schools. The results are now these programs are in over 10,000 schools and have touched the lives of 5 million students globally, and it's still growing. A, advocacy and community building. Kristen's story started with a stumble. She received an F in French class, yet that would set the stage for something remarkable. Kristen went abroad to learn French, and she also ended up learning about the soul of the French culture. In particular, she discovered the long, leisurely meals around the table without devices and often with meaningful conversations around the spicy topics of sex, religion, and politics. Very different than the United States. Years later, she had her own young family, and she craved the connection she felt while she was in France studying. She wanted that for her family, and she wanted that for her community. So she had an idea. She painted a simple wooden picnic table, a beautiful color of turquoise. She placed it in her front yard, close to the street. And that turquoise color was no accident. Did you know that in many cultures around the world, turquoise is considered the color of hospitality? Little by little at that table, strangers became friends, and friends became a community. The intentional turquoise table stands as a beacon, inviting neighbors to pause, connect, and belong. It's more than just a piece of furniture, you see. It's a catalyst for change. Today, the impact of that small gesture extends far and wide. Turquoise tables and the front yard movement have become symbols of unity and connection, not just in her neighborhood, but in several continents, including right here in Africa. B, breaking boundaries. JR's story began in the concrete jungle of the projects, in the vibrant world of graffiti art. He honed his skills. He pushed the boundaries of his art and creativity because he wanted his art to extend beyond the confines of galleries and museums and be accessible to everyone. Eventually, JR developed an innovative photographic collage technique that was large in scale. He wanted his art to spark meaningful conversations and touch the deepest parts of our humanity, drawing attention to the forgotten and the marginalized. One of his large-scale projects was a giant table on the border between the United States and Mexico, a site of great contention for both countries. Now imagine the photograph of a young child's face. Zoom in until you can only see the eyes of a pure and innocent child. That is the image that he used and printed on a vinyl tablecloth over 60 feet in length. He stretched that tablecloth across the border, strategically placing one of the photographed eyes on each side of the border wall. Enormous in size, this table was impossible to miss. It drew Mexicans and Americans alike, including hikers, bystanders that were curious, and even the United States Border Patrol joined that significant intentional table, passing drinks and snacks through the border wall to each other. The table served as a powerful reminder to the world that despite the walls and borders that divide us, we are all human beings. Walls and borders will not and cannot separate us. L. L is for love, courage, and compassion. Geraldine's story began with a heartache that cut deep. The loss of her brother, who is a helicopter pilot who sacrificed his life during the Vietnam War. Years later, and still hurting, she and her husband came up with an idea to help. They formed an organization dedicated to planting trees where there were once bombs and landmines in the most scarred region of Vietnam. This important work has been going on for over 3 decades and ultimately grew to building homes, schools, and libraries. And that work has touched over 100,000 Vietnamese positively. Perhaps, though, that one of the most poignant parts of this story takes place as 2 former enemies meet across a table decades after the horrific tragedy. Deep in each other's eyes, they see the horrors and the lasting effects of war. They share their stories and the wisdom of their years. The table being a great equalizer, allowed them to set down their differences. They found forgiveness. In the quiet moments of their intentional table, the true power of love, courage, and compassion transcended any imposed border. E, educating ourselves and others. Kelly learned about the staggering reality of human trafficking, a global epidemic, and the weight of the enormous issue weighed heavily on her heart. So she and her husband, moved by what they had learned, came up with an unconventional idea, even a wee bit awkward, to help. They decided to invite friends over for dinner and ask them to pay the equivalent cost of the meal so they could teach what they learned and donate to the cause. Their friends were intrigued and agreed. As the guests gathered around their intentional table, something bigger happened, a movement of compassion and purpose. These seasonal dinners have now been going on for almost a decade. People from every socioeconomic background are welcome. They contribute their time, their money, or maybe even both. Some people help prep in the kitchen, some even donate vegetables grown in their garden. All are welcome. The result of this move is strengthening a community and teaching about the fight for freedom. The thread that weaves these stories together is that one ordinary person with extraordinary impact has set one table at a time. So you might be wondering how you can set your own intentional table. The answer is to care. Be curious to see what pulls at your heart and captures your attention. Use your own authentic gifts and put them to work for good, respecting that we are one human family, and embrace a perspective that might be different than your own. Just like all the people in the stories. I encourage you to set your own table and do so with care. Whether you're at a community table, a school table, a conference table, or your very own dinner table, you're invited to pull up a seat and take a chair. Let's come together instead of sitting apart. It is the essence of our humanity and a source of hope that can unite us. If tables could talk, they would tell the stories of our lives. What stories will your table tell?